The Third Reich was one of the most formidable military powers in history, boasting a diverse and innovative arsenal that came close to securing victory in the global conflict. Fortunately, not all German science was enough to overcome the Allied forces, allowing us today to examine with curious eyes some of the destructive gems of Nazi Germany. Among this endless inventory is a piece as iconic as it is brutal, the MG42. With a nickname as striking as the Hitler's chainsaw, it seems that there is not much more to explain about the reputation and offensive power that this machine gun provided. However, in this new installment of military history, we aim to truly contextualize how effective the platform is and why it remains relevant despite having more than 80 years of service. Join us on this fascinating journey into the past, and be warned that things are about to get noisy. In the early months of World War II, a German company was tasked with the challenging job of improving the MG34 machine gun to face the new challenges of the conflict. The idea was not to start from scratch and discard all the advances of Nazi engineering, but rather to update and simplify what already worked well. The issue was not with the functionality, but with the expensive production process and the excessive refinement of the firing systems. For the new design, the internal system still used short recoil like the MG34, but the bolt system was originally patented by a Polish gunsmith. Instead of numerous individual pieces, the decision was made to use large stamped metal portions with few moving parts. Thus, the first functional prototype emerged, with a batch of about 1,500 units designated as MG3441, which was tested in combat trials in the same year. Once its impressive capabilities were confirmed, the weapon was officially accepted in 1942, receiving the historic name MG42. The infamous Hitler's chainsaw, one of the most powerful machine guns ever put into service, was born. You can hear it roar below. The total production reached 400,000 units, exponentially increasing the number of weapons year after year until the end of the war in 1945. The incredible aspect was that the new MG42 could be manufactured in half the time of an MG34, using even less metal in the manufacturing process, more destructive power at a lower cost and with less use of vital resources in a time of crisis, something every military officer dreams of hearing. The MG42 was designed to use the standard German Mauser rifle cartridge, caliber 7.92 x 57 mm, one of the Third Reich's favorites. Note that the National Socialist industry had an incredible variety of these ammunitions, including high penetration, explosive, and tracer variants. The high-speed ammunition for Luftwaffe machine guns had the PMK projectile, or phosphorus with a steel core, and the B projectile, or observation, which reached a 15% higher muzzle velocity than the standard. The PMK projectile was an armor-piercing incendiary, while the B was an incendiary explosive containing phosphorus and had a pellet that exploded upon contact with any target. In both cases, the end result was lethal. In 2021, a group of enthusiasts gathered to conduct a modern test of the National Socialist chainsaw. The idea was to carry out a fun and not-so-subtle experiment. Open fire, not with one, but with 8 Maingrausive 42s on an innocent family van. It is likely that German soldiers in the 1940s faced more dangerous and moving targets, but it is always fun to see a platform with over 80 years of history tearing apart a modern car. Let's see the result.
2, 3.
Firstly, we can state with absolute certainty that the vehicle will not be returning to the streets. In a matter of seconds, this German classic is capable of covering the target with a burst of cartridges with enviable precision. It is precisely because of this effect of close-range impacts at high speed that it is called a chainsaw that could literally cut people, objects, and vehicles in half. The high performance and versatility of the 7.92 Mauser projectiles led them to be adopted by various armed forces worldwide. With the 9x19 Parabellum ammunition, it shares the curious honor of having been manufactured and used by both sides during World War II. The reason for its use by the Allies and the Axis is quite simple. The Mauser cartridge had been mass-produced since 1905 and was used in machine guns such as the British Besa, the Greek CKM, and the Polish version of the Browning, as well as in virtually the entire National Socialist arsenal. As a curiosity, Soviet engineers returned to this projectile for the construction of the Zastava M76 sniper rifle. Considering historical rivalries, there is no better proof of the cartridge's capabilities than that. The nickname Hitler's Chainsaw is not just a threatening name, but a description of the power that the MG42 was capable of unleashing. This platform is notable for its extremely high cyclic rate for a single-barrel weapon, averaging 1,200 rounds per minute. When compared to US Gatling-type designs like the GAU-8 or the minigun, these figures may seem unimpressive, but believe us, in 1942, there was nothing like it. For example, the MG34 had a maximum rate of fire of 850 rounds, while US units like the M1 T919 Browning barely reached 600 shots. The MG42 surpassed them all not only in volume of fire, but also in reliability and operational capability. According to experts, in the European theater, this machine gun was present in every corner, whether defending fortifications or mounted on armored vehicles. But destructive power alone does not make a great war tool, and the Germans knew it better than anyone. During the development of the MG42, the goal was also to produce a weapon capable of engaging in close-quarter combat, but with an effective range sufficient to cover the no man's land that separated the trenches, the famous stretch between both armies. With an effective range of 1,200 meters and a maximum range of almost 4,000 meters, we can say that they more than met their goal. Additionally, the system was easy to reload, even in the heat of battle. The most common method was the use of open links with 50 to 250 rounds, although belt drums with a capacity of 50 to 75 cartridges also existed. This way, in a matter of seconds, Reich soldiers could once again rely on the brutal firing rate of the platform. Imagine saturating a distant area with automatic fire in an instant. With a platform like the MG42, it is possible to clear trenches or provide suppressing fire to halt the enemy's advance. It can also cover friendly troops, preventing the other side from showing their heads. After all, no one wants to face over 1,000 7.92 caliber projectiles. It is scenarios like these that made the platform an absolute protagonist of the conflict, primarily in the European theater, as Germany's allies had little opportunity to secure its services. In an interview given years after the conflict, American soldier Orville Martin Jr. described it as follows: "It sounds like a zipper, it consumes a lot of ammunition, and that's a logistical problem, but it also consumes a lot of people. When there's a group of soldiers advancing, you can cut them in half with that machine gun." Thanks to its lethality, simplicity, and the brutal sound it generated, it earned the reputation of being one of the best automatic weapons on the planet. When discussing weaponry, we often emphasize its sound and how recognizable or threatening it is. Few platforms in history achieved the psychological impact that the MG42 had on its enemies. That chainsaw-like roar truly became a harbinger of death for Allied infantry. The situation became so problematic that the US Army was forced to produce a propaganda film where some myths about the machine gun were debunked while boosting the soldiers' morale. The material compared Allied weapons versus their German equivalents, and the lesson was that there wasn't much technical difference. The secret lay in the troops and how they were used.
This is the real stuff. Captured German film showing their automatic weapons in action. These are the weapons we're up against in the European and Mediterranean theaters of operation. But we've captured not only the film, but the actual weapons and ammunition.
Due to its devastating firepower, the German army placed the operator of this machine gun at the center of the infantry unit, with support provided by other soldiers. Each MG42 had a team of 6 people: a commander, a gunner, a soldier carrying the tripod, and 3 additional men carrying spare barrels, ammunition for reloading, and tools needed to fix the weapon in the field. Due to the large amount of personnel required, the use of this weapon ended up shaping infantry strategy. Beyond this, the chainsaw proved to be a flexible element, capable of being used in various roles. When Allied troops attempted to attack infantry positions protected by the MG42, the German team applied suppressive fire. In most cases, the men of the Allied side had to wait under protection until the ammunition ran out, or until the chainsaw required a barrel change due to the heat generated by thousands of rounds fired. That was the Achilles heel of this spectacular design, as Allied armies trained their troops to wait for the cessation of fire and then launch the offensive in the few minutes it took to change the overheated parts. Every 150 shots, it was expected that the team would replace the barrel to avoid overheating. With the right changes, it is estimated that the lifespan of that component was between 3,500 and 8,000 rounds, but there was fine print in that contract. If the situation was critical and the suppressive fire could not be paused, it is said that at 500 shots, the German barrels became completely unusable and had to be discarded as scrap. As mentioned in the introduction, beyond the impressive arsenal available to the Third Reich, its defeat was decisive and clear. Once World War II ended, weapons like the MG42 became of great interest to the United States and the Soviet Union. The question was, how can we apply Nazi engineering to build the machine guns of the future? This is how many subsequent designs were heavily inspired by Hitler's chainsaw, imitating its operation or rate of fire. Moreover, at present, the Washington Army has several units of this model. Surely the Führer would be confused and furious if he saw these American weapon trials, including a descendant of his infamous chainsaw. For its part, Germany had to undergo a long period of restructuring its armed forces. Despite having decades of experience in creating weapons, it was only in the 1960s that the design of new platforms was undertaken, and practically all of them were successors to Nazi models. The fascination with the chainsaw's DNA is not exclusive to Germany. Whether in the Austrian MG74 or the Italian MG42-59, the influence of those Third Reich engineers is visible. The powerful design of the MG42 was even imitated within some Soviet nations like Yugoslavia, where the M53 model was built under license, maintaining the original 7.62 caliber and that unique rate of fire that earned it a reputation. In this new generation of destructive tools, the MG3 is undoubtedly one of the most prominent, a kind of direct heir to the MG42 that remains active and relevant to this day. Within the Spanish Army, the improved version of the MG42 continues to be used. The Iberian country imported such weapons from 1959 onwards and has made minimal modifications to keep it on par with more modern designs. Weighing approximately 11 kilograms, including the bipod, and with a firing system without substantial changes, the only radical change from its National Socialist ancestor is the use of NATO 7.62 cartridges instead of the previously analyzed 7.92 Mauser. But enough of descriptions. Let's see and hear what that MG3 is capable of. Even the sound is similar. If the footage were in black and white, we could assume that these are old videos from World War II, but they're not. The MG3 is practically identical to its predecessor, except for that 7.62mm ammunition belt. Both weapons have served the forces that use them well, and there are no signs of wanting to replace them. If something works well, it's better not to touch it. From being the favorite weapon of an empire based on terror to becoming a globally recognized machine gun, present in the arsenals of almost 30 nations, the history of the MG42 is an individual portrait that accounts for the imposing German military industry that, both before and after World War II, has given rise to some of the most powerful weapons ever created. During World War II, the number of weapons and vehicles used far exceeded any previous or subsequent records of conflict. Millions of machines and equipment of all types were employed. After the surrender of the Axis forces, there was a pressing question on the minds of the victors. What to do with all these resources? Many were reclaimed by the winning sides, while others were left to fate. This material was studied to aid in the technological development of its new owners. Unfortunately, much of it was used again for killing. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we will tell you all about what happened to Nazi weapons after World War II. On May 8, 1945, after nearly 6 years of bloody battles, Germany signed its unconditional surrender to the Western Allies and the Soviets. The war in Europe had come to an end. The country's government lay in ruins, its policies imposed by the victors. Its territory was divided into two: the Federal Republic, controlled by the United States, the United Kingdom and their allies, and the Democratic Republic under communist influence. But these powers were not only vying for territory, they also sought control over Germany's military resources. Thanks to its advanced weaponry, among other factors, the Reich had dominated the early years of the war. Now all those weapons and vehicles were in the hands of the victors. Decisions had to be made about how to distribute them. Leaving them under German control was not an option. Every effort was made to prevent their use in future conflicts, at least not against the victorious countries. Many German civilians had obtained pistols or rifles left behind and were reluctant to return them. They felt these weapons might be necessary in the turbulent post-war situation in the country. Nevertheless, a significant and detailed effort was made to disarm the population and what remained of the armed forces. Both Western and Soviet powers sought to study German weapons to gain an advantage over each other. It was clear to everyone that a new conflict was looming between these two blocs. One could say that the Cold War began as soon as World War II ended. Negotiations were attempted initially to agree on the distribution of these materials among the victors. Distribution was supposed to be based on contributions during the conflict. Due to massive mobilization of men and equipment, losses suffered, and being the first to reach Berlin, the Soviet Union demanded a significant portion. Overall, there were not many protests from Western powers, as they also had substantial gains. United States and the United Kingdom, primarily besides seizing a large quantity of weapons and vehicles, also provided refuge to numerous Nazi scientists. They were offered exemption from the Nuremberg trials, where their compatriots were being judged, in exchange for collaborating on research projects for the Allies. This plan was known as Operation Paperclip and focused mainly on achieving technological advancements in rockets and chemical weapons, areas where the Germans had made significant progress. Between 1,500 and 2,000 scientists, engineers, and technicians were secretly transported to the United States to assist in fields such as aeronautics, rocketry, engineering, among others. We can hear a writer discussing this operation.
Thank you.
So these were top scientists in the German war effort, sought out by the U.S. military as the war was coming to an end.
That's right. These were Hitler's top weapons makers, and Operation Paperclip became a classified military program to bring them to the United States. It also had a public face, so there was, on the one hand, the truth about the program kept secret, and on the other hand, the idea that we'll tell the public that these are the good Germans.
The Western strategy of focusing on obtaining technological knowledge from former Nazi scientists contrasted with the Soviet plan. the Soviets largely appropriated German weaponry and incorporated it into their own ranks. Thousands of tanks, planes, and rifles became part of the Red Army or the forces of their communist allies. Nevertheless, resources were also allocated to unravel the scientific advancements achieved by the Germans. This was done through their own operation, named Osoaviakim, where German technical personnel living in areas occupied by the Soviets were brought into Soviet territory. For instance, thanks to these men and recovered Messerschmitt Me-262 planes, the Soviets created their first turbojet fighter, designated the MiG-9. This vehicle was used extensively by the Eastern Giant and also sold to their allies for use in numerous conflicts. Another case was the study of V-2 missiles, the world's first long-range ballistic missiles. Analyzing these was crucial for the Soviets to later launch the Sputnik satellite, for example. Scientists appropriated by Paperclip also assisted in the development of the American space program. One such figure was Wernher von Braun, who became a member of NASA and played a vital role in achieving the moon landing. Because of these contributions, it can be argued that Nazi researchers were crucial in the space race between the two powers that occurred from the 1960s onwards. There was another field where this German personnel helped advance. The Americans had dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japanese territory in August 1945. To remain competitive, the Soviets needed to develop their own weapons of mass destruction. The Germans had begun planning the design of these devices, but had not achieved a usable model before the Reich's surrender. Now, however, captured or incorporated scientists in the Soviet Union were put to work to continue developing this weaponry. The Russians made significant strides in this area, and with the help of new personnel, achieved their first successful test in 1949. Thus, they became the second nuclear power, behind their American rival, thanks in part to the contribution of Nazi research. The industrial use of nuclear energy stemmed from this military branch. Starting from the 1950s, substantial resources were employed to generate electricity from this source. In 1954, the Soviets built the first functional nuclear power plant in the city of Obninsk. Western powers also followed suit, and in the subsequent years, the first of these facilities were inaugurated in England, the United States, and other countries. Submarine warfare was another military aspect, where the Germans were far more advanced than their rivals. The Type WWII submarines, the latest model created by the Germans, barely saw combat as they entered service only in the war's final months. However, by the war's end, these vessels were captured and incorporated into the fleets of the victors. They featured a design that achieved longer submersion times, underwater speed, rapid torpedo loading, and crew comfort, making them highly valuable to American and European powers. Drawing primarily from this model, countries such as the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and Sweden would launch a new generation of submarines. Apart from armament development, there was a darker aspect to leveraging German scientific achievements. During the war, Nazi doctors conducted inhumane experiments on prisoners held in concentration camps. These experiments primarily involved exposing men and women to chemical weapons, harmful or lethal pathogens, and brutal conditions like hypothermia. In many cases, those subjected to these trials were subsequently killed. The experiments had no moral or ethical basis and were vehemently condemned upon discovery. Nonetheless, the results obtained were used to expand medical knowledge, such as understanding the effects of chemicals used in combat. To this day, controversy persists over whether it is ethical to use information from these experiments, as we can hear in the following news report from the United States.
Documents obtained by 12 News show the Arizona Department of Corrections is taking steps to restart its gas chamber for the first time in more than 2 decades. The state will use chemicals similar to the deadly mix that killed millions in Nazi death camps.
How can you think that that's reasonable? Did anybody who is associated with this process ever study the Holocaust?
In summary, both sides, the Allies and the Communists, developed their military technology based on or aided by German innovations. That's why, in conflicts during the following decades, political allies of these powers would face each other using weapons and vehicles derived from the same research. This was evident, for example, in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Nazi-captured equipment was supplied to governments fighting during these Cold War decades. In many communist and anti-communist movements of these years, factions fought with weapons like the MG42 machine gun or the STG-44 rifle, both of German origin. The latter greatly influenced the design of the AK-47, the most widely used rifle worldwide. However, there were also many military resources that would not be utilized by any party. For instance, the cost of transporting vehicles from Europe, where they had seen combat, to the United States was significant. If tanks or planes were of inferior quality compared to American ones, or studying them would yield no technological advancement, it was easier to simply dump them in the ocean. This prevented them from falling into enemy hands. This disposal was not limited to German equipment, but extended to their own as well. This occurred in nearly all theaters of operations, conducted by most of the Allies, but primarily by the United States. On the island of Espiritu Santo in the Vanuatu archipelago, there's a place called $1 Million Point. It earned its name from the value of everything the Americans dumped there. In general, this included vehicles such as trucks, cranes, and even tanks, as described in the following video.
At the conclusion of World War II, the Americans made the decision to leave all their equipment here on Santo, and that included bulldozers, trucks, graders, jeeps. Everything that was used here on the island in one way or another was going to be left here on Santo. The equipment was offered to the French, who were the government of the day here on Santo, and the Americans offered it to them at 6 cents in the dollar. But the French thought they could outwit the Americans and wait until they'd left, and then they could get all the equipment for free. Once the Americans got wind of what the French were up to, they decided that if the French didn't pay for that equipment, no one was going to have it. So for 2 solid days, they brought everything they could get down here to this spot and bulldozed everything into the sea. And just to make sure no one had access to it, they blew up the jetty. This is where this area gets its name, $1 Million Point.
Much of the captured German ships met the same fate and were sunk to the bottom of the sea. However, at times they were given a final use. Many of these ships were employed in tests of new weaponry developed by the Allies, often involving nuclear bombs. World powers had a keen interest in assessing how these weapons of mass destruction affected ships within their impact zones. Countless tons of equipment, ranging from small caliber weapons to vehicles and chemical arsenal like mustard gas, were dumped into the sea. Nearly all of this equipment remains there, slowly rusting away, despite the ecological and environmental hazards they pose. Of course, there were other endings for much of these resources. Starting from 1944, it became common for the Nazis to bury armaments in European soil, in secret caches. This was planned under Operation Werewolf. The idea was that as the Allies and Soviets advanced on German or conquered territory, a resistance force would operate behind enemy lines. They would unearth these weapons caches and launch surprise attacks on the invaders. This would sow disorder in their ranks and halt or slow their advance. Additionally, it was expected that after a potential German surrender, this force would continue resisting foreign occupation. While these werewolf commandos carried out some sabotage and assassination actions, the movement was always plagued by disorganization and poor leadership. There are no verified records of operations carried out after the war ended. The reality is that they never posed a real threat to their enemies, and the plan was quickly abandoned. Nevertheless, both Allies and Soviets were aware of these caches and invested resources in finding them. Many were unearthed and their weapons confiscated, but others remain undiscovered. Even today, sometimes by chance, someone comes across a cache full of Nazi equipment. Often, treasure hunters intentionally seek out these time capsules to donate them or add them to their personal collections. The clay in which they were preserved and the low humidity of their environment often means they are found in perfect condition, as if the war ended yesterday. Below, we can see the type of objects found by these individuals. Another large portion of resources, both from the Axis and the Allies, was neither buried nor sunk but remained in inaccessible places. This was mostly the case in desert theaters of operations, such as in Libya or the Sahara. Here, hundreds of vehicles like airplanes and tanks are currently found in locations known as war cemeteries. The warm climate and lack of humidity have preserved them in relatively good condition, even decades later. Something similar occurred on the Eastern European front. During the rainy seasons in the Russian steppes, the terrain became so muddy that soldiers were sometimes forced to abandon their vehicles. Tanks, trucks, and other armored vehicles became unusable under the mud. After the war ended, in most cases, this equipment was not recovered due to the same cost reasons discussed earlier. Therefore, to this day, they remain immobile in the swamps of the former Soviet Union. In countries that were part of this government, there are currently tank hunters who make a living by recovering and selling parts of these ancient machines. Another use for captured Nazi equipment was to supplement a portion of the raw materials lost during the war. This occurred mainly in the Soviet republics, whose industrial power suffered a severe blow during the conflict years. These weapons and vehicles were a good source of metal, so many of them were melted down and used for manufacturing in other sectors, or even within the military. Finally, pieces of weaponry were sold or donated to museums where they are exhibited to this day. There are a large number of these museums, both in Western and Soviet countries, showcasing weapons, vehicles, clothing, and other types of equipment. In Germany and Italy, it is also common to find these scenes recreated, depicting how combat might have looked during some of the battles of World War II. All of these museums aim to educate and raise awareness among the population about one of the bloodiest conflicts in modern history. Below, we see an example of these museums.
Okay, over here I have a small machine gun bunker. Okay, it's got the K98s, the MP40, the Lugers, the P38, the MG42, the MG34, and Hitler was way ahead of everybody. This is the fastest shooting machine gun in World War II. See those 8mm bullets? They're dated 1938. Let me show you. 1938, if you could zoom in. That machine gun shoots a rate of 12 to 1,300 bullets a minute.
Throughout this episode, we've seen that weaponry, both Nazi and Allied, had numerous fates. Some were destroyed, others saw combat again in different conflicts, while many were used to advance the military industry of the victors. Despite the ethical concerns that using German research or equipment could entail, all countries utilized them to gain a better position in future conflicts. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, significant technological advancements took place. Many of these were reflected in the military sphere, with the emergence of new weapons and vehicles that would become the precursors to tools used today. In this context, World War I served as a brutal and bloody testing ground, where many of these discoveries were put into action for the first time. One of them was the Winchester Model 1897 shotgun. Featuring a plethora of improvements and innovations compared to previous versions, it became one of the most effective resources used by Americans in the trenches of Europe. So much so that the Germans attempted to prohibit its use. Today in this new military history video, we'll tell you all about the Winchester M97, also known as the trench sweeper. As its name suggests, this shotgun began production in 1897 by the American company Winchester Repeating Arms Company. It was designed by John Browning, one of the most successful firearms inventors in history, having to his credit pistols like the Colt M1911 and machine guns like the M2, among many others. Several of these, including the Winchester 1897, yielded such good results that they continued to be used in conflicts decades after their creation. The shotgun we're discussing today was an improvement over the 1893 model. Some of the advantages this version had over its predecessor included, for example, having a stronger and longer frame. This allowed it to withstand the discharge of 12-gauge white powder cartridges, which had recently entered production at that time. Nevertheless, it could also use larger calibers, such as 16 gauge. The shell ejection was on the side of the weapon, reducing the risks of these larger cartridges jamming the shotgun upon exit. The stock was elongated to provide more stability. Finally, a safety was installed on the slide, preventing accidental discharges and further reducing the risk of the weapon jamming. But there was one particular feature that gave it an advantage over other models and made it continue to be used for years. Its external hammer, which provides the ignition for the shot, lacked a disconnector. This meant that it was not necessary to release the trigger for the projectile to be expelled. It was enough to just pump the gun. This technique was known as slam fire, and below we can see the incredible speeds that a skilled shooter could achieve. The Winchester M97 was not the first pump-action shotgun, but all the advantages it presented over its competitors made it by far the most successful. It quickly became common in civilian activities, such as hunting and sport shooting. However, its leap to fame would occur in another context. In 1899, only 2 years after its introduction to the market, it began to be used in military conflicts. This happened during the Philippine-American War, which erupted in the Asian country. After the Americans defeated Spain a year earlier in a brief confrontation, all their remaining colonies fell into Uncle Sam's hands. This initially did not include the Philippines, as they had declared their independence from the Spaniards during the conflict. But the victor turned a deaf ear and annexed the territory despite vigorous local protests. During the 3 years that the war officially lasted, the battles that ensued were brutal. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands of Filipinos, both civilians and fighters, died. Armed rebellions by guerrilla groups continued for nearly 10 years after the surrender of the Asians, mainly led by local Moro peoples. These fierce fighters were known for their close combat skills, where they used weapons such as knives or swords. In particular, the Americans feared the juramentados, as they called the suicide soldiers who attacked without any hope of survival. It was for this reason that the introduction of the Winchester M97 became so important for American troops. Hundreds of them were sent to the Philippines, where they quickly became the invaders' trump card. Not only were they devastating at short distances, but the brutal effect they had on their victims attacked the morale of the defenders. They witnessed how the bodies of their comrades were torn apart by projectiles fired at rapid speed. Thanks in part to this shotgun, the Americans gained complete control of the archipelago in 1913. With its combat-proven effectiveness, the M97 became a recurring part of the American arsenal. Another occasion it was used was during the expedition in the border war between the United States and Mexico, which began in 1910. During this conflict, which occurred in the context of the Mexican Revolution, Uncle Sam's troops faced off against fighters of Pancho Villa. Here, they once again armed themselves with the infallible shotgun to fight against their southern neighbors. But there was a particular event that sparked the popularity of this weapon, as well as the controversies surrounding its use. In 1914, the First World War began, or the Great War as it was known at the time. The trigger for what would be the largest and bloodiest conflict to date began with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The crime was carried out by the Bosnian Gavrilo Princip, who resented the Austrian occupation of the Balkan countries. The imperialists quickly blamed the Serbian government, with which there were strong tensions, for aiding the terrorist and his organization, without any verifiable evidence that this was the case. The Serbians denied all responsibility, and in response, Austria-Hungary sent them a severe ultimatum. Among other things, they demanded the elimination of organizations calling for the union of the Balkan countries and the participation of imperial officials in the investigation of the assassination. Although most of the points were accepted, some conditions were imposed. This did not satisfy the Austrians, who declared war a few days later. This activated the military treaties signed at the beginning of the 20th century. Serbia was an ally of the countries that made up the Triple Entente: Russia, France, and the United Kingdom. When they joined the conflict, they also led to the mobilization of the so-called Central Powers, namely Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, who would fight in favor of Austria-Hungary. Many other countries joined the war during the 4 years it lasted, such as Italy, Japan, and the United States. It was the first time the world had seen a conflict of this magnitude. Combat fronts opened in many regions, such as the Middle East, Africa, the Pacific, and the Mediterranean. But undoubtedly, it was in Europe where the most brutal and well-known battles of the First World War took place. At the beginning of it, Germany made good progress towards its Western enemies, managing to defeat Belgium and penetrate much of French territory. But here, their invasion was halted by countries of the Triple Entente, who were now known as the Allies. After some offensives and counteroffensives, both sides became exhausted and had to resort to trench warfare, with the idea of gathering forces to mount a decisive attack. But this type of combat would mark the entire conflict and would extend throughout much of it. Next, we will hear an explanation of what this novel method of warfare consisted of.
Initially, trenches were seen as a temporary measure, one which armies would move on from soon enough. These early trenches were more like ditches, the kind you'd see at the side of a road today. But over the course of the war, they developed into more complex systems.
And you end up with a fire trench, which is your frontline trench, then a support trench, and then behind that a reserve trench. You've got 3 lines connected by what's called communication trenches, so that men and material and supplies can move up and down between the trench lines without having to go over open ground.
Despite the terrible battles that took place among the belligerents, resulting in hundreds of thousands of deaths, the front line barely moved a few kilometers. New weapons were needed that could provide the push sought to prevail. The need to break out of this stalemate, combined with the significant technological advances that had begun at the turn of the century, marked the introduction of many military innovations. Airplanes and tanks, the vehicles that would define martial doctrines of future conflicts, were used for the first time during the Great War. Submarines, heavy artillery, and machine guns, although they had seen combat before, had never been deployed to such a level as in these years. Other darker types of weaponry, such as chemical weapons and flamethrowers, also had their baptism of fire here. In turn, there was innovation in personal armament, such as hand grenades and automatic submachine guns. This is where the central theme of this video comes back into play: the Winchester Model 1897. When the United States entered the war on the side of the Allies in 1917, it brought with it its battlefield-tested weapon designs. After witnessing the development of combat for 3 years, they had taken note of how brutal the fighting in the trenches was. They knew they needed something to give them an advantage. That's why they turned to the Winchester Model 97, not without making some modifications first. A steel plate was added to prevent the soldier from getting burned if the barrel overheated. A bayonet lug was also added, indispensable in the frequent hand-to-hand combat situations. The incredible power of this weapon was quickly demonstrated in the battles fought by the Americans. During the well-known charges that occurred between the positions of the combatants, the men armed with shotguns, if they survived the machine gun and artillery fire, invaded enemy trenches. It was there that these bloody personal struggles took place, with little room to maneuver and the need for quick actions. Having a weapon capable of quickly emptying the magazine, resistant to jams and, above all, devastatingly powerful, was vital for the Allies. Such was its effectiveness that the Winchester M97 was baptized as the trench sweeper. This and other technological advances used by this side were some of the reasons for the rapid collapse of the Central Powers from 1918 onwards. Not only was it used to take out enemy positions, some skilled soldiers were placed in advantageous positions, armed with these shotguns. Their mission was to shoot at enemy grenades while they were in the air, causing them to explode before reaching their target, or at least diverting them from Allied soldiers. This technique is known as shooting on the fly, and it is not only a combat strategy, but also an Olympic sport, although in this case, clay targets are usually used instead of explosives. The Winchester M97 proved so devastating that the Germans protested its use, saying that according to the laws of war, it should not be used. This may sound strange, but it should be remembered that this conflict, unlike others that would occur in the future, was still seen under a code of honor and chivalry, at least at the outset. The belligerents were supposed to follow certain stipulated rules, or else they were considered unworthy. We can hear below the mentality and outdated tactics that were held at the beginning of this conflict.
Audacity, audacity, always audacity was the French credo. Their horses were ready.
All the powers, England, France, Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, held these great reserves of cavalry equipped with swords and lances, ready for the ride through to victory.
This was mostly assumed by officers further away from the front lines, while the rank-and-file soldiers had to face the bloody reality of what modern warfare was. However, the German Empire relied on what was stated in the 1907 Hague Conference, where the doctrine of future armed conflicts had been stipulated. One of its points said, "The employment of arms, projectiles, or materials specifically intended to cause unnecessary suffering is especially prohibited." For the Germans, the Winchester M97 did not comply with what was established here. The power of this weapon resulted in, even if a soldier had the fortune to survive one of its shots, the pellets often caused terrible wounds. Losing a limb due to a single projectile was common. Additionally, these injuries were exacerbated by the epidemics that plagued the battlefront. The trenches had poor hygiene conditions, so diseases spread incredibly easily. This, coupled with the scarcity of medical supplies by 1917, meant that shotgun-wounded soldiers often ended up being counted among the fatalities. These arguments were not sufficient for the judges of the U.S. Army, who dismissed the German protests. They did not see the weapon as violating any laws of war. Furthermore, they argued, if the Winchester was considered to cause unnecessary suffering, the same should apply to flamethrowers or serrated bayonets used by the Germans. This without even mentioning chemical weapons, which were indeed prohibited under the Hague Agreements, but were still used by both sides.
Eine Granate, die explodiert, die sieht man und hört man. Und wenn man den Kopf in den Graben nimmt, dann hat man auch einen gewissen Schutz und dann ist die Wirkung vorbei. Aber Gas ist eben unheimlich, weil es still ist und weil es dauerhaft wirken kann. Also selbst wenn Sie aus dem Graben herauskommen als Soldat, müssen Sie befürchten, dass Gas in den Trichtern noch vorhanden ist. Was viele Menschen beeindruckt hat, ist natürlich die Vorstellung, dass hier ein industrieller Massenmord stattfindet.
Faced with the refusal of the Allies, the Central Powers declared that any prisoner of war found in possession of this shotgun would be punished. Responding to this threat, the Americans said the same fate would befall the Germans who used the aforementioned weapons as counterexamples. Still, despite these hostile comments, there are no records of any captured soldiers suffering abuse for these reasons. Moreover, there is very little audio-visual material documenting the use of the Winchester M97 on the battlefield. According to some historians, the United States subtly ordered troops to stop being armed with the lethal shotgun. The reason was that they did not want to give the enemy press reasons to portray their forces as barbaric and incapable of using proper weapons. They also sought to prevent their military allies, France and the United Kingdom, from using this argument to exert control over the American army. They viewed this country as a junior member within the alliance and could use any reason to limit its sovereignty in wartime decisions. Other sources claim that in reality, the Winchester continued to be used on the front lines, but any photo or video of it was censored before reaching the general public. World War I ended on November 11, 1918, with the armistice of the only Central Power still standing, Germany. But this did not mean the end of the use of the Winchester M97. After the conflict, it began to be used by some sectors of the security forces in the United States. It could be seen in police officers or bank guards like American Express. It was thought of as a riot control weapon, using its pre-war version without the bayonet. The shotgun's effectiveness was such that, despite the existence of much newer designs in the following decades, it continued to be used for large-scale military conflicts. Many American Marines turned to this model during World War II. Even decades later, during combat in Korea and Vietnam. This weapon was also chosen when close quarters fighting was deemed likely. Thanks to its power and reliability, governments like China and Germany copied its design or bought the American version massively. This was not surprising, as some of these countries had witnessed the formidable power of the Winchester. We've reached the end of the video and we want to ask you, do you think the use of certain firearms should be prohibited during war? Don't leave without leaving your answer in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that have left their mark on history.